little while. So much insane stuff happens, especially lately with the collapse of FDFK, the Munich Security Conference. There is some stuff that I wanted to cover. So we are going to go through this stuff. It is funny because as time goes on, the more and more vindicated I am for this whole like parody. When I started this, it was just kind of like, oh, it sort of operates on the basis of movie logic. But the more time goes on, the more I realize, no, unironically, they thought this was a Hollywood movie. And all of their planning was based on the belief that this whole war was some sort of Hollywood movie. So it turns out that the U.S. Army Department of Defense had no maintenance plan or virtually no maintenance plan, and it didn't have a plan to provide spare parts or a very, very minimal one. Because why would you need spare parts? I mean, this is exactly what happened to the Germans at the end of World War II. Basically, they had a shortage of production capacity to just fight on two fronts at once. So they had to choose between building more tanks or building spare parts. And they went with building more tanks. And that was part of the reason why the Tigers and Panthers broke down so much. Other than the fact that they were just rushed through production and many were built with slave labor, they just didn't have any spare parts for them. And spare parts are kind of critical. That was one of the reasons why the Sherman was so effective, is spare parts were easy to use and easy to exchange. And this has been the issue. Let me see if I can actually. I'm sorry. I should have prepared this. I prepared some of this equipment saved by Ukraine. All right. They're like, I'm just trying to see if there's a summary of what Ukraine received overall over the course of the conflict. Okay, all right, let me just open this up. Okay. So we'll get into this in a second, but let's address kind of the fundamental issues. Why was this thing like kind of doomed from the start? So everybody gave them weapons and money. That's good. Weapons are good. Now the problem is, let's look at what they wound up getting. So we have 14 Challenger 2s, 31 Abrams, and I guess at the beginning this was 20 Leopard 2s. It turned out to be a lot more than this, I think, overall. Also, they sent the Leopard once. Now, once again, the issue you come across is different equipment. I don't believe they're standardized. I think the ammo is slightly standardized. I don't think NATO ammo works with Challenger 2s, because Challenger 2s have a rifled gun, whereas most tanks have switched to smoothbore guns. So I forget how many Abrams they eventually wound up seeing. So they have 31 tanks that require their own maintenance infrastructure, their own spare parts. I believe that Abrams use a different type of fuel, or at least they have a different type of engine. They have a gas turbine engine instead of a diesel engine. So those require different parts. The 14 Challenger 2s all require different parts, different maintenance. Tanks are highly complicated machines, and it takes a long time to figure out how to maintain them properly. This is why armies normally only use a couple types of tanks, generally speaking one. But if you look at like the Russian army, my understanding is T-72s, T-80s, T-90s, T-90Ms all use very similar parts. They all use very similar parts. I think a lot of the stuff is interchangeable, the electronics. I think some of the engines are different, but the point is, if you have spare parts for one, you'll have a lot of the spare parts for the others. Maintenance is very similar. Let's just think about this for a minute. You also have stuff like the electronics, I'm sure, aren't the same on these. The particular quarks. By the way, I'll try to remember to put my sources in the description or comments. And this is a hat tip to Brian Berletic, who did a really good video on it, and I'm taking a lot of stuff from this. Yeah, but once again, I think a lot of these tanks use different fuel because there's gas turbines, there's other stuff. Okay, so that's 120 NATO information. Also, Ukraine has all of their Soviet tanks as well. I think we have to keep that in mind. Was that their tank force prior to this was Soviet tanks. And Soviet tanks have completely different spare parts. They have completely different guns, that sort of thing. Now, the nice thing about the T series is even if maybe they aren't quite as advanced as some of the modern Western tanks, the Ukrainians know how to use them. They've been using them, well, I guess since they were invented, since the 50s or 60s or 70s or whenever these were built. They know how to maintain them. They know their quirks. They know how to use them, stuff like that. So those are good quality. Regardless, I mean, to a certain extent, what was it that Tamerlane said? Let me try to find that Tamerlane quote. I'm just trying to find it. It was something to the effect of 100 men are here, 100 men here are better than 10,000 who are not, or something like that. So, I mean, having a tank that functions, even if it's not the best, is better than no tank. Challenger 2 uses non-NATO ammunition. Abrams uses, does it say what it's... No, what the hell? It doesn't say what the ammo is. Okay. So the whole depleted uranium, my understanding is depleted uranium is not actually that radioactive enough to really matter. It is a heavy metal though, so it is toxic, kind of like lead or stuff like this. We also have the Striker. So the Striker has its own parts, its own gun, its own electronics. The Bradleys once again have their own. The Patriot is, I forget how many Patriots they have. I think they only got 8. Once again, these are extremely complicated weapon systems. And as I've said since the beginning, like I don't blame the Ukrainians at all for their problems dealing with this shit. Because they had to basically, I'm not even sure if this stuff would work with their computers. Because, like, does this work with their CNC, with their radios? I mean, I know all this stuff can be fixed, and it's probably not that hard to fix it. But they're having to do all this stuff piecemeal while they're fighting like a deterministic war and getting bombed constantly. So it's just... how are you supposed to get like 14 Challenger 2s and have a crew like, let me see, how many people is it in a Challenger 2? Okay, so 4. So if you only have like 12 of those, you need what, like 100 guys or something who are only chained on Challenger 2s. What if you lose some of those crews? What if they get hit in a bombing raid or something like that? Also, none of this stuff is really designed for the particular environment that they find themselves in. Now, the Chieftain did a very good video on this a while back when he was talking about the Sherman versus the T-34 versus the IS and all this stuff. And his point was that armies have different needs. Armies have different logistical capacities, budgets, stuff like that. So if the U.S. has higher tech stuff that's better than the Russian stuff, but requires a lot more maintenance and finagling, the U.S. might very well have the military budget for that, and their needs might be better fulfilled by that, whereas the Russians have something a bit less expensive and more rugged and a bit more, I guess, kind of utilitarian. And the Russian army might find that that is a perfectly useful thing. We have this, what is the Starstrike missile? We have long range rockets. We have the HIMARS. We have. I think there's a bunch. Does it say what the artillery systems are? Okay, so howitzers. We have uh, the M777. So then we also have which one is this? Bayraktar TB2 drone. So that's just a little bit of a sampling. Now, we'll get to what the Defense Department said, but Brian Berletic brought this up, and I thought this was very good. This was an issue. Um, Cost of U.S. versus Russian systems. One Humvee costs what a dozen UAZs does. That is true. It's kind of my point is that the U.S. at least theoretically has the money for it, so cost is not nearly as big an issue. It's kind of funny what it says. So this was the experience. This is from 2023. So this is from last year, less than a year ago. And this was a report on when they attempted to build an air force for the Afghans. So the initial thing that they were going to give them was Chinooks. Um, Now that didn't work because it's difficult because once again you need to train your pilots on how to use Chinooks. Someone in the comments or the chat can correct me if I'm wrong. But aren't helicopters really difficult to fly? And necessary aren't the I don't know how transferable the skills for one are for another. So the Pentagon was going to do that, give them Chinooks, but they decided that they were going to supply them with Russian Mi-17 helicopters instead. So I think this was canceled because of the Crimea invasion. But so yeah, let's see here. Uh, an American-made helicopter, the U.S. Army's Workhorse Chinook, built by Boeing in Pennsylvania, was found to be the most cost-effective single-platform type for the Afghan Air Force over a 20-year period, according to the excerpts. How? Like, it's not explained. Why is it more efficient? Why is the Chinook more efficient than the Russian equivalent? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that much about helicopters. Isn't a transport chopper kind of a transport chopper? Um, I could be wrong. I don't know very much about helicopters. So why are they buying Russian helicopters when there are American manufacturers that can meet the very same requirement? Now, something to keep in mind regarding this is with all the corruption, all the sweetheart deals, all the no bid contracts, how bad does the Chinook have to be in this context to get beaten by something like from their mortal enemy? Let's see here. A senior department official was focused on the long-term requirements and not the immediate needs of the Afghan military. Imagine that long-term thinking, which were best met by the Mi-16. U.S. commanders wanted the Mi-16 because it's durable, easy to operate. The Afghan Air Forces had experience flying it. It doesn't say in this sentence, but experience maintaining it. A lot of them, at least some of the modern Afghan armies, some of the soldiers in the Afghan security forces probably flew them back in the 80s, back during the People's Republic of Afghanistan. Some of them probably used them during the Civil War. It's something that's around. People have some familiarity with them. Once again, it's something I always find kind of funny about this is the Mi-17 is durable and easy to operate, but somehow the Chinook is still better. Like, they don't explain why the Chinook is better. I like how durable and easy to operate are almost like nasty words. Like, oh, well, your thing works, but my thing requires a ton of maintenance. Yeah, helicopters were super important. Let's see here. I'm just seeing where this is. Where's the stuff? Yeah, corruption is rampant in Russia's defense industry. Look, the U.S. has no right to accuse anyone of having a corrupt defense industry. Like, Russia's is corrupt, but at least it doesn't take as much money in terms of its corruption than the U.S. Like, the U.S. defense industry is probably the most. Maybe it's not the most. It depends how you define corruption. It wastes the most money, like by far. We're not dealing with a corrupt system. Corruption is the system. This is a world. This is not a world we're familiar with. No, you are 100% familiar with it. The entire U.S. defense industry is corruption. So we have. Okay, so this was from the Air and Space Forces magazine. So they decided to abandon the Mi-16 because 17 because of the Crimean invasion. So this is just kind of an example. They claimed that the shift from Mi-17s to UH-60s moved the date for the Afghan Air Force self-sufficiency back to at least 2030. So I don't know when they exactly started building these things, started this, but they occupied Afghanistan for 20 years. And it would still have taken like another 10 to actually have them able to use them. And then they pulled out in 2021 and the whole thing collapsed. Um, like, how is that viable to a country undergoing an active insurgency in which probably more than just about anywhere else in the world you need helicopters in Afghanistan because of the terrain, because of how dangerous it is moving from city to city. And they're just like, okay, maybe in 10 years you can actually use this stuff. Uh, they had to train them to use this. Okay, so they were saying that the Afghan soldiers were able to do most of the maintenance. Um, might have been able to sustain its Soviet aircraft with its own maintainers by 2019. I like how this is barely even a factor to the U.S. Army. Like, who cares if they can maintain their that's not important. In 2020, before the U.S. withdrawal, Afghan manufacturers could only conduct about 40% of the work themselves on the U.S. Funded, the U.S. aircraft. Um, so 60% of the Blackhawks were grounded within a couple months after the U.S. pullout, and everything else basically collapsed. And they just like you gotta wonder the level of retardation in the U.S. general staff. Like, how could nobody think of this? It's like, is this how factory owners think? Is this how people who run stores think? That they just buy equipment and they assume they'll never have to replace it or do maintenance of it or anything? Especially something as complicated as this. Like, you don't buy a car expecting to never have to get a mechanic to do stuff, never having to change the oil, never having to rotate your tires. Uh, as to the Department of Defense plan to publicly explain what went wrong, Ryder said, DOD has conducted its own classified lessons learned report. The United States employed a mirror image report approach with the Afghan National Defense Forces, the practice of teaching other countries to fight the U.S. way with ground troops protected by massive air support. But when the U.S. prepared to go, the Afghans couldn't sustain the fight on their own. Afghanistan doesn't have any oil. They don't have the money to buy oil. I don't think they have a pipeline to import oil. So we're going to go with literally the most expensive and complicated armed force possible. Like, is there a model more expensive and more complex than having your entire army based off of air power? Not that there's any, like, not that it's bad or anything, but the report concluded with a quote from a South Vietnamese officer reflecting on the collapse of South Vietnam nearly 50 years earlier. They taught us to fight like rich men, even though we were living as poor men. In the end, the officer said he cannibalized several helicopters for spare parts, commandeered one that was still airworthy, and took as many men as he could with him to sanctuary in a nearby country. It was a decision mirrored by Afghan pilots 47 years later. Like, once again, I don't understand how they could not, like, think of this shit. Like, I don't know. So this is we're gonna get to our topic. I just wanted to give some background on, for somehow they didn't learn from like the previous two times that it was a catastrophe. Press release: evaluation of sustainment strategies for the Patriot air defense systems transferred to Ukraine armed forces. An evaluation of the Department of Defense sustainment plan for Bradley, Stryker, and Abrams armored weapon systems. Okay. Inspector General Robert P. Storch announced today that the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. Okay, we'll look at this actual report because the actual report is frankly kind of shocking. The two evaluations found the Department of Defense had not developed or implemented a plan to sustain the Bradley Strykers and Abrams armored vehicles or the phased array tracking radar. It sounds like something from Star Trek. To intercept on target Patriots defense systems provided to the Ukraine forces between January and September 2023. The report concluded that without deliberate and planned sustainment support, including spare parts, ammunition, and maintenance, the Ukrainians would not be capable of maintaining these weapon systems in their ongoing fight against the full-scale invasion. These two evaluations, growing body of work providing oversight to the Department of Defense's support to Ukraine. So what was the plan? Like, did they just assume that they were going to get more money? Is that the issue? And they weren't expecting to have monetary shortages? Was there just no, like, there was literally no planning? Like, I could have told you this. Any average American who owns a car could have told you this. It's like, what is your concern when you're buying a new vehicle? How reliable it is, how often you have to maintain it, how expensive the maintenance is. Like, you could ask literally any person, I think, who's ever bought a car or other kind of motor vehicle, and they could have told you this. I'm pretty sure anyone who owns a business, anyone who owns a construction company, anyone who runs a trucking company, anyone involved with logistics, every single one of these people could have told you this if you had asked them. But they decided, I don't know, for whatever reason, we're not going to ask people who actually deal with this stuff. How does the U.S. Army do this? That's, I think, the bigger question. I think there needs to be a bigger investigation. Does the U.S. Army just not have maintenance plans for anything? Like, once again, this is fucking movie logic. It's like, you know how in movies you always have all the tanks charged and none of them ever seem to break down or require maintenance or stuff like that. They're just always available. They're always just ready to go and stuff like that. That seems to have been the plan. There was literally no plan. Movie logic. Let's see here. The DOD provided Ukraine with armored vehicles and air defense systems without a plan to ensure their long-term usefulness. While the DOD is currently working on developing such a plan, the lack of foresight in this matter is concerning and should be rectified promptly. Like, no shit. What is the logic? Like, I don't know. Am I exaggerating, guys? Like, am I just being like a Russian shill or something? Even if I was like the most pro-Ukraine person, I'm just going to take a screenshot of this. For the thumbnail. Like, even if I was the most pro Ukraine person, this would make me furious because it just shows they didn't give a fuck. It shows it's amateur hour. These people aren't professionals. They have no idea what the fuck they're even doing. Do you think that the Russian army thinks this way? Do you think the Russian army entered this without any kind of like plan to bring in to maintain their stuff? I haven't really heard that much about Russian stuff breaking down. Maybe it has been. I haven't heard nearly as much. Let's see here. While conducting these evaluations, found the DoD had provided limited spare parts. Uh, Ammunition and maintenance support following the transfer of these weapon systems to Ukraine, and did not coordinate or tailor these efforts into a comprehensive sustainment plan. The absence of such a plan puts at risk Ukraine's ability to fight effectively using the U.S. provided equipment. No shit. As well as the DoD's readiness to address other national security threats if needed. Like, think about this is even more concerning. It says other national security threats. So is this a problem like with their other stuff? If the DoD does not identify the sustainment requirements for the weapon systems it provides to Ukraine, it cannot accurately predict uh, sustainment costs or assess the long-term readiness of impacts to U.S. military units that operate these systems. If implemented, the recommendation. Okay, so let's see. To address the issue, the DoD issued multiple recommendations addressing the need for the DoD. Okay, so full implementation of the recommend. Like, this is amateur hour. Okay, so let's take a look at the report. This is like the previous one. This is from the far right Russian source, the Department of Defense. Once again, it's fake news. It's Russian propaganda issued by the Department of Defense. Uh, Determine the extent and implement the statement plans. Okay, so let's see here. The DoD transferred or was transferring 100 and okay, so transferred a bunch of stuff. The U.S. Army, just seeing here, the DoD had not developed or implemented a plan for sustaining the Bradley Strikers and Abrams provided to the Ukrainian armed forces. So it's literally there's no plan. It's just going to be like a movie. They're just gonna somehow keep functioning. Oh, good job, Millie. Millie continues. Like, this was all on Millie's watch. What an Essler. Supply packages containing consumables and spare parts. It provided some things to conduct field level maintenance through the end of FY 2024. Wait a minute. These two things seem to contradict each other. I guess it's saying they provided them with stuff, but there's no systematic plan. DoD acknowledged that the existing efforts did not constitute a sustainment plan and had not yet identified the following sustainment efforts before 2024. Spare parts, consumables, ammunition, and support equipment. Personnel, facilities capable of actually maintaining the tanks. That's not important apparently. Lack of sustainment planning. Let's see. Authorities used to provide the sustainment requirement. The lack of sustainment planning occurred because the UAF did not include a sustainment requirement. The DoD had not issued policy or guidance regarding sustainment of weapon systems transferred to the UAE, and according to an official from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the Defense Department had ongoing discussions on whether to seek authority to use other means to provide for sustainment needs of the weapon systems beyond 2024, but has not reached a decision. Um, how is this? This is not the explanation. So the explanation is there was no sustainment planning because there was no sustainment planning. I mean, pretty much. Like, it doesn't say why. Like, what was the thought process? We don't know. Providing weapon systems uh, to the UAF without a plan to ensure sustainment creates additional risk. No shit. Like, I like how this is. How much money do you think they spent on this report? Not having spare parts for complex weapon systems. Also, like the Ukrainian crews at the depots, how are the Ukrainians maintaining this stuff? Like they would have had to learn how to deal with these things in a matter of like months. I mean, these things are complicated. Like learning to repair a car is hard enough. Learning to repair an M1, especially when you have no spare. How do you even repair it without spare parts? Even if you know how to do it, if you don't have any spare parts. The new cope I've seen is that they're gonna 3D print the parts. They're gonna 3D print the parts. Let's see, 3D print parts. Okay, so that's the new plan. The new plan is we're gonna use 3D print metal 3D printers to build the parts for Ukraine. That's the plan. That's the plan. It's yeah, it's a great idea. Um, that's 100% how that's gonna work. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I'm sure like you have some utility with 3D printers on the modern battlefield. You could probably print some stuff, but I just don't see how the printers can produce parts of the quality and temperance permitted to do it. Um, okay, specifically, the UAF may not be able to independently sustain. Okay, cannot accurately predict sustainment costs or assess long-term readiness impacts to other U.S. missions. Uh, yeah. So also, one U.S. Army official stated that the DoD's current practice of drawing down existing U.S. Army stocks to support Ukrainian needs without limits may require the DoD to choose between the readiness of UAF units or the readiness of U.S. Army units. So this is a Department of and people, once again, you can always correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wrong all the time. This is a U.S. Department of Defense official document. Why does it efficiency? What a joke. Integrity efficiency. Um, saying that giving all this stuff to Ukraine means we can't maintain our own stockpiles. So that they're admitting we're running out of stuff. We recommend that uh, provide recommendations. Okay, like so management or response to comments. Let's see here. So that's the current plan or the lack of a plan. Let's see evaluation. We'll just take a quick look at the Patriots. Where is it? Does it not? Where is the report? Is this it? Let's look at the Patriot one while we're here for shits and giggles. Evaluation of sustainment strategies for Patriot air defense systems transferred to the Ukrainian armed forces. Let's see here. The U.S. committed more than 44 billion in security assistance to the government of Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's invasion. The United States has committed to provide air defense capabilities. Uh, Anti Annihilator brings up probably the single best explanation for this retardation. The DoD strategy was designed to make Ukraine have to be long-term dedicated purchaser of U.S. military supplies, no alternative. Yeah, that's pretty much it. There was no plan because the hope was they would keep approving money to give to the MIC in order to do this. And I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but this isn't like you're pro Russia or pro Ukraine. This is like you're pro or against basic common sense. Let's see here. DoD officials provided basic operation maintenance training courses on Patriot defense systems. I think you're going to need more than basic operations and maintenance. I don't know. I think I have some people on this channel who have a number of people served in the army. If anyone's ever operated like not even Patriot missiles, but just any kind of something somewhat similar, electronic warfare systems or air defense systems. I feel like that takes a lot of training, particularly to repair it. I could be wrong though. I don't think that that is a dumb assumption. The DoD did not establish advanced training to address life cycle maintenance tasks, a process to anticipate sustainment needs, a supply system for providing replacement parts, or facilities necessary to provide life sustainment activities. So no minimal maintenance training, no spare parts, no facilities means they don't even have like the tools required. Because the presidential drawdown authority to transfer the systems does not include requirements. Because I think Biden did some like kind of loophole to this. So the NATO stuff is somewhat. The U.S. uses its own stuff. The UK uses its own stuff. I think the leopards are somewhat interconnected, but once again, it takes years and years and years to figure out how this stuff works. It's not just okay. Even if you could train the guys in 6 months to do all the maintenance and all the repairs, you still need facilities, you need all the tools, you need the spare parts, you need the logistic system that gets the parts where they're needed. This is all while Russia has air supremacy and can just blow up anything it wants. Uh, so recommendations, there's no maintenance. Uh, so that was the plan, or the complete lack thereof. Um, Oh, let's see here. Objective, background. Let's see. Does it say how long training takes? I'm just seeing here if it lists that. Uh, yep, did not provide for sustainment beyond basic training and initial supplies. The components of a Patriot air defense system, included in Figure 1, require complex, frequent, and regular sustainment and replenishment to maintain their operational capabilities, in addition to any repairs due to use or battle damage. So even if you don't use them, it still doesn't work very well. Without formalized training infrastructure, technicians, material, logistics, and policy, sustaining the operational capacity of these systems may present it's not may, it's will. The Patriot did not include life cycle maintenance tasks. I think that this is pretty straightforward. I don't really, regardless of your opinion on this conflict, I don't see how you can argue that this whole thing wasn't just completely retarded. Like that the U.S. thought that they could give Ukraine advanced weapon systems with minimal training and no spare parts. And now they're like, we're just going to use 3D printer. That's the new plan. We're just going to use 3D printers, um, and These critical metal parts were not big or complex or heavy, but they stopped military platforms from working, and spares would take months to arrive. Now they can make them in 30 minutes. In actuality, the printing, heat treatment, and machining takes more like hours in the span of the morning. But like, don't you have to like polish the parts and treat them? And you need people to design this stuff and an AutoCAD or whatever it is. Training Ukrainian soldier engineers. Why is there pictures of bacon? What? Is that really the best picture they could come up with? Like them boiling pierogies and making bacon? So they were supposed to be able to make these parts in 12-hour days for 15 days, and then they're good to make advanced tank parts using 3D printers. Not just any metal 3D printers. These are the good 3D printers. Uh, so I think that mostly covers it. Basically, Ukraine is fucked, and they were fucked from the start. And no amount of bravery, no amount of dedication, no amount willingness to sacrifice for the homeland is going to deal with these very basic problems. These basic problems that the U.S. obviously did not give a shit about and made no attempt to come up with a plan for at the outset. I have a pretty low opinion of the U.S. defense industry and the U.S. Army's logistical capacities, but honestly, I didn't realize it was this bad. I thought it was just like insufficient and an underestimation. But it's not that they underplanned; it's that there was literally no plan. Kind of reminds me of that old DSP clip where he's like, "There is no plan B." So that is the genius that, yeah, as Constantine points out, they had like 8 years to do this since 2014, and there was never anything. So that's the video. I will post the links to this in the video description. I actually managed to grab them all. And if you want to share them, if you want to read these for yourselves, then be my guest. But otherwise, God bless you guys. Have a nice Sunday, and I will